The requests I've been getting most now are around stress management, resiliency, and then how do I lead people remotely? Which has not, well, it has stuff to do with like the technical side of leading remotely and strategies related to that in leadership, but it has more to do with trust. And so when we think about trust, the next one after the stress management is interpersonal relationships, because there is this caveat, like a huge valley of no trust existing because relationships are really on stilts. They're on weak legs right now. They have very little depth to them, or they've had very little depth to them. And then you add crisis to the equation and we wonder why people are really struggling. They don't have the collective support and trust pre-existing to be able to step into catastrophe together because they don't think they have each other's back. And so I'm recognizing and noticing for a lot of people what they need to be working on is the depth of those relationships. And it's incredible. It is and has been incredibly uncomfortable for people to want to, number one, because they bring with them, of course, all of these thoughts and beliefs and assumptions and expectations about what that means. But as soon as they force themselves into it, because generally I force people to do things in their emotional intelligence development, I'm like, look, if you want to be different, you got to start doing things differently. So just give it a try and then report back to me. If it doesn't work, you can have all of your money back. No one has ever asked for their money back because it works every single time they step in and try, the other person reciprocates. And the strength of the relationship begins that journey of trust and compassion that just strengthens to the point that now when they need to talk about something, when they need to express something, they feel confident that when they do, the other person isn't going to berate them or shame them or call them names. Their own personal self-worth is not at risk anymore because they've taken the time to establish the level of intimacy that's necessary for trust to exist.
You said so much good stuff there. You mentioned like just go out there and try it, right? And when they go out there and they try it and report back, there's always a reciprocation. I'm curious if you have an example of what one of those things could be that you would have like an executive go out and try, and how that informs, you know, the way that people respond.
Yes, I have a very specific example. I'm working with an executive team, actually, of an oil and gas company. So not only are they managing through COVID-19, they're also managing through the gas and oil crisis, which is like the biggest double whammy anybody could achieve. And they've had to go through like 3 rounds of layoffs. So you could just imagine the executive stress level of needing to do these types of things that you never would expect you'd have to do ever in your career. And part of what is necessary is a very high level of communication amongst your executive team. And also when you're losing money, you need to have facts and stats, and you need to trust that people are coming and giving you the information that you need. So with 2 members of this particular executive team, in their separate confidential sessions, they spoke about each other. And in those conversations, they spoke about, I don't trust that what they're telling me is true. And so we explore, like, why? Where's the proof that that's true? Is there proof that that's true? Like they've lied to you several times and you have that proof? Or is this just like your assumption and judgment of that? I get these signals, but what are those signals related to? They're related to history. They're not related to objective reality. So the exercises I give them are basically your tasks this week is to step into their office once every day and ask them how they're doing. How's life? How's the family? How's the spouse? Nothing about work. And if you get a 30-second response and then they give you the nonverbal cue of you need to leave, then follow the nonverbal cue. I bet you tomorrow when you step in, the response might be 45 seconds long. And by the end of the week, you're in a conversation. It will take time. Give it time. And every time they report back, they're like, that was a lot easier than expected to be. I'm like, yeah, you got out of your own way. Like that generally is the problem, is you're in your own way with assumptions and judgments that feel very real in the moment, but have, like the stool, no legs to stand on.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Getting in your own way. There's a lot that can be said about that. I don't know, Michelle, if you have any thoughts on any of that. Like, what does it mean, and why do we get in our own way? Because that seems to be the theme, I think, in emotional intelligence, right?
Yeah,
and self-awareness.
I think that's what gets us stuck, is that we're standing in our own way. And it's funny, as you were talking about your experience, when I mentioned that, the big ones that are coming up for me right now, it's because I'm working with an executive team of a university. So they're academics, and very different approach with each other and how they lead their teams than what I've seen in a corporate environment. So for them, the emotional expression was a big one. And I did a similar thing, Teresa, in challenging them to each be able to express how they're feeling. First of all, identify. We went through the exercise of identifying individually, but then being able to express that. So they really had to let go of a persona that they have carried as an academic, that this is emotion, not, intelligence, not my capabilities. So that's all I'm focused on for 24/7 as an academic are the facts. Well, this is a fact too. The fact is that you feel this way. And the fact that you can express it to your colleagues is a fact as well. And so we had to turn that, battleship around in a bathtub, to turn that paradigm around for them to say, yeah, you are actually standing in your own way because you're only viewing it from the lens of an academic, how you viewed everything. Now you have to change it a little bit to view that emotion is also a piece of data. It's a piece of data, and it's information, and it's a fact, and it's valid. So challenging to do that. And yeah, they express themselves more, and they come back, and the reaction is, it was hard. Mm-hmm. I felt it. I was nervous doing it, but I did it, and it was well received. Mm-hmm. So it grows empathy too between each other as they start to understand each other better. Mm-hmm. So it was an interesting. It's been an interesting, project to be on with these guys.
Now, Jamelle, you're also working with executive teams and panels of executives as well. What do you find is showing up most often?
Themselves is what's showing up. Usually we're so busy that we can avoid actually looking at ourselves and what we're feeling and what we're thinking. But when you're isolated and you're trapped in a confined space, and oftentimes you have to be with yourself, then what you'll notice is that you have feelings and that they are impacting you, and you have thoughts and that they are impacting you. And so what I'm seeing is people meeting themselves and not necessarily knowing how to manage that. For me, on my end, it's a great thing because it represents an opportunity to really be able to dive into self-awareness without all of the distraction of going here, going there, this, that, and the other thing. You're there, you're in one place. And that's been interesting because in some cases, I've had clients that are thriving because they can finally do a deeper dive into what's actually showing up for them. And so what I notice is that as people, as leaders, when we become more self-aware, and it could be so simple. I'll give you a really simple example. So I'm doing a confidence building exercise with an executive, because what you find is that within executive teams, a lot of times they're very self-actualized, which is another one of those skills, which means that they're on the pursuit of meaning. They're very driven, but oftentimes, and they've accomplished a lot, but oftentimes those accomplishments have not actually been concretized or integrated into their sense of self-confidence, self-esteem. So you need to balance those two things out. And so we're working on identifying, what are the wins? What are the main wins that you've had? Let's talk about them. Let's go through some of the skills. And what you notice is as we're describing some of those skills, and this is where the emotional intelligence piece comes in, the negative self-talk starts coming in. And immediately we want to invalidate ourselves, make ourselves not good enough. And this is what was happening in the session, and he brought it forward to me. Talk about why that wasn't actually a great thing. You've still got so much further to go. You're not as successful as you think you are. So there's this inner critic, as most of us call it, that rears its ugly head. So to be able to have the time and the space to be able to identify that and really deal with that and unpack what's happening there is the opportunity that I've seen, because we're more mindful of ourselves, and there's more time and space to actually delve into that self-awareness, self-analysis component. So now that we identified that it's there, we can start to change the story and say, okay, so you notice whenever you're acknowledging your skill, you immediately cut yourself down. How are you going to grow in your skills if you won't even allow yourself to possess them or to have them? Challenging question. How do we want to approach this? Well, we want to be able to recognize skills, not feel that our skills make us better than other people, but we want to be able to feel confident about what we can accomplish, and we want to still be realistic about how we can develop them, right? From a healthy point of self-esteem. So I'm noticing that most of the clients that I'm working with are becoming more self-aware because they're spending more time with themselves, and they're not as externally distracted as they typically would be when they're out and about, moving around. All of that stuff is happening.
One of the pivotal silver linings of this particular crisis has been the shift in how we spend our time. And time has often been perceived our greatest resource. But if we take that lens and look and go, the greatest resource is not time, it's how we spend and choose to spend that time. So if the silver lining I get to learn now is by giving myself time in solitude to be self-aware and think about the thinking, so that I become in the workplace an executive presence that influences all in the most optimistic and positive way possible. In the household, I am the rock and foundation for everyone else as well. And when I lead like that, I automatically elevate there. That is hands down a silver lining that, for me, helps me to look at COVID-19 as a benefit in our history of the world.
Yeah, I agree. You know, remember when you wished for what you have now?